Good morning, everybody. What's your name? Juan. That's your reward for sitting up front, taking initiative, and getting the information as close as you can, jumping into the action. I've been here in Silicon Valley for over 20 years. I've been coaching startups in all that time. And the one thing that I've learned is that the people who take the initiative, the ones who get close to the action, the people who ask questions, get involved, they're the ones who succeed. So you are my example, and all you people sitting way back there in the corner, come on up. And of course, my clicker quit working. Oh well, time to go old school. Oh, isn't this great? My word of advice to you is never buy Hewlett-Packard products. Because they do funny little things like pop up a, would you like to buy a new power adapter for your laptop? And it completely screws up your presentation. So anyway, this is my book. He has a copy now. And for all of you who have your smartphones out, click the QR code. You can go ahead and start reading the book right away. I will be giving out a couple extra copies to people who ask really, really good questions. And if you've got $10 or a credit card, I'll actually sell you one later. This is a distillation of an all-day class that I used to teach to try to get you guys knowledgeable about the 7 layers of marketing strategy so that when you do launch, when you do make your first hires, you can sanity check what they're doing. If you're really good and you talk to the people at Draper to pay my speaking fee, we can have that all-day class sometime while you're in residence here. So by all means, grab all the representatives and say, have Guy come here on Saturday and teach us everything. Now, next week, I think it is, this gentleman's going to be here, and I want you to attend to him. He's a personal friend of mine. And this book of his, Tough Things First, will be the next required reading in Silicon Valley. You'll read Crossing the Chasm, you'll read my book, then you'll read Tough Things First. Ray Zinn is the longest serving CEO in Silicon Valley. He started a semiconductor company without venture capital. He was profitable 36 out of 37 years on a GAAP basis, 37 for 37 on non-GAAP. And he is one of the most articulate people I have met when it comes to humanistic leadership and management and servant leadership, which is going to be very essential because Silicon Valley and the tech industry have different ways of relating to employees, and he basically invented the process. So be here next week. So, one of the great management minds of all time said something which I find perfectly provocative and absolutely true. There are only 2 functions in business. That's innovation and marketing. All of you are probably already innovators. You've got that spark. You've got that great idea. You want to charge ahead with it. You have innovated. The other half is marketing. Because when you get right down to it, what is business? It's thinking of something somebody needs and selling it to it. Everything else is administrative or tech support. So if you don't get the marketing side down, the probability of failure skyrockets. Probability of mathematical equation for all you number people. Probability of success equals 1 minus the probability of failure. Reduce the probability of failure, your probability of success goes way up. So, why do founders go astray? What is it that causes them to stumble? There's probably 1,000 or 2,000 different ways. We're only going to talk about the top 3 today. The first one is that they have a lousy perspective of what their market really is. And it manifests itself primarily in hyperopia, looking too large, or myopia, looking too small. Founders, especially techie founders, have a genetic inability to articulate a value proposition. And there's a lot of good reasons why they cannot do so, but it is their downfall most of the time. And they also have a reluctance or an inability to segment their markets and define their personas in such a way that they can communicate the value proposition which they are unable to compose. And this, of course, has led to a lot of very sad stories here in Silicon Valley. Founders believe that they see their markets accurately, and almost never do they. And it falls to a number of different problems. The internet, God love it, has actually made it possible to sell to everyone on the planet. Problem is, no one can sell to everyone on the planet. IBM cannot do it. Oracle cannot do it. It's too big. However, 90% of the founders here in Silicon Valley think that they're going to be able to throw up a website, communicate to everybody, start to sell everybody. One of the problems that trying to do this, even if you're not trying to do the whole planet, but just half the planet, is that you spread yourself too thin. If you're trying to serve too many different types of customers and too many different types of markets with too many different feature sets trying to fit all of their needs, you're never going to make anyone happy. And because of that, you're never going to get your revenue inflow that you need. Plus, you will be burning yourself out and burning all of your investment capital just trying to sell to all of these people instead of trying to make them happy. One of the funny things that happens, sad, funny, take your pick on words, is that a lot of founders, once they do try to sell to the entire world and they start to see their burn rate pulling them down, then revert to arguably the second worst thing that they could do. They go back to their early adopters and they start refining their product to be the perfect product for those 5 or 10 customers. The problem with this, the myopia, is that you are now focused on way too small of a market. You never get your top line revenues coming in. You never get word of mouth buzz because you're designing your product for too few people. And I've seen endless number of companies go through this ping pong match. They go, try to sell to the world, try to sell to a few people, discover they can't do that, try to go the other way. By the time they reach that, they've burned through their investment capital. They're not finding new investors because they have no traction. And then that leads them basically to running to the bankruptcy court. By the way, at any time, interrupt and ask questions. Love questions. The second big problem that founders have is that they don't know how to articulate a value proposition. They're completely incapable of it. So shout it out. Give me your definition of what value is.
What you give to a customer.
Value, what you give to a customer. Anyone else?
How many customers you reach, the demand of the market.
Number of customers, yes.
You solve a pain.
What was that?
You solve a pain in your customer.
Okay, in the back there.
Value is, say for a B2B business, it is what you can save the other business. If you can make money by saving other industries money, you are creating value. If you can improve upon existing systems, you are creating value by saving time and money.
Okay. Those are some reasonable answers. The right answer is a little bit more abstract, conceptual. Value is what lies at the intersection of need and differentiation. Let's break that down a little bit. Let's say you have a product and it is in no way, shape, or form differentiated from all of your competitors. What do you have? You have a commodity. There is no intrinsic value to it. It is completely replaceable by other things on the market. So you have to have differentiation. Likewise, if there is no need, there is no demand. So you have to find this sweet spot. You have to have a product that's different, delivers something that's different, and that differentiation has to meet the need of whatever your defined market or segment is. Think about the product that you have designed and ask yourself several basic questions. Is it really different? Is it different than what my competitors do? Is it different than what my customers are already doing on their own? If not, then you don't have a product. Then ask yourself, what do I know about my customers? What are their needs? What are not only their functional needs, but their emotional needs? Because you have to really win both halves of the human brain before you can sell somebody. If you don't have that need and you don't have that differentiation, you're going to have a very, very rough go when you launch. So very few founders know what value is. And there's a couple of reasons why they don't know what it is, and this is one of the fundamental things that keep them from communicating it. One of the problems founders have, especially all of you bit coders out there, is that you are intimate with your product on a level that you will never be with another human being. You know it from the inside out. You see the elegance of it. You see how all the parts work together. And one of the problems that founders have, techie founders at least, is that they communicate their products from the inside out. They will talk about features and benefits, and they will talk about internal functions, and they will talk about efficiency scales, and blah, 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 none of which matters to your customer. Founders look at their product from the inside out. The world, the market, looks at your product from the outside in. So you have to understand what the outside is, which is your customer motivations, to even begin to express what a value proposition is. If you cannot express your value proposition, you cannot communicate it. One of the exercises I take people through all the time is we list the motivations of all the different genotypes, you might call them personas, and we itemize them, we distill them, we find out what the common ones are, and then we compose all of our market messages around those motivations. So, quick quiz, shout it out. What is the value that was being communicated by Apple when they launched the iPod?
Virtual reality of your individualized value creating.
Individualized.
Virtual reality value creating.
Okay.
Just an absurd number of songs in your pocket.
Fun.
I don't see any numbers up there.
1,000.
Fun.
Fun. Wait, who said fun? Okay. We're homing in on what else? Back in the back.
Different and cool
Different and cool, yeah. One more.
in your zone,
What was that?
in their zone.
Oh man, you are 99% there.
Like in the book.
Sure, absolutely. What Apple was communicating was the ecstatic relationship to music in your head, your privatized world, your passion to connect with that music that you like. That's why you couldn't put a face on any of these people, because every face is different and you would hone to that. That's why you couldn't put a lot of words up there. That's why they didn't tell you that the 20 to 20K frequency response of an iPad was nearly flat. None of that mattered. They wanted to connect to that one half of your brain, which is all about passion, love, joy, all the human elements of the world. It was such a successful campaign, and I witnessed this, that when you went to Best Buy the first week of this campaign, despite the fact that there were many, many other MP3 players on the planet which had much better technical specs, people walked into Best Buy and said, I want an iPod. And the salesman would say, okay, well, we have a lot of MP3 players. And they said, no, I want an iPod. And I pulled a couple of these people aside and said, why do you want an iPod? I don't know, I want one. That's the essence of branding, is that you bias the purchase decision before the purchase is ever made. Memorize this quote, and if you ever put it in your own materials, you have to give me credit for it because I wrote it. It is the most succinct definition of what branding is that I have ever encountered. And I know it's popular because I see it popping up in a lot of other consultants' slide decks. Branding is making the market think and feel what you want them to think and feel about your product. So let's break that down a little bit. Branding is making, forcing, compelling, causing other people, maybe against their will, to think and feel, left and right brain, heart and mind, everything that encompasses the human experience, forcing them to think and feel what you want them to think and feel, not what they want to think and feel, not what their neighbor thinks and feels, what you want them to think and feel about your product. The reason it is so important to memorize this, take it to heart, and put it in part of your product planning is that if you do not define your brand up front, the market will define it for you. And the market is not polite or kind in any way, shape, or form. I was one of the people intrinsic to making SUSE Linux the undisputed number 2 Linux distribution on the planet. When I hired on to do this work for them, I asked, what is your brand? And they said, we don't know. I'm sorry, that wasn't a good German accent. We don't know. By the way, never let a German technologists give a presentation on stage at a trade show. I've seen it. It's a disaster. You will like our features? No. So I went out to the market and I said, what do you think and feel about SUSE Linux? And aggregating all the comments I got back, SUSE Linux's brand at that time was quirky little German software company that, happens to have a Linux distribution. And they were trying to go toe-to-toe with Red Hat in North America, which owned the market, which owned the minds of all the techies. So we had a lot of rebranding work to do. So decide what your brand is for the segments that you're going to sell into. Make sure it agrees with the emotional bias of your buyers, and then make it stick. Communicate it relentlessly wherever you go. Yes?
Should your brand be like a tagline, or should it be like a photo like they had with Apple? I mean, how do you condense it into something?
So the basic question is really, what is the brand? Is it a tagline, or is it a logo or whatnot? None of those. A brand is a statement that you will use internally in your company in order to guide all other communications. That includes the tagline you create. That includes your core market messages. That even includes your logo design. Because if your brand says, we're going to be warm and fuzzy, and your logo looks, like something out of a punk rock concert, then you have a brand misalignment or a brand communication misalignment. So it's a single paragraph, maybe even less, maybe one sentence, that you distill until you have come down to the essence of what you want people to think and feel. If you really want to get into marketing and branding, I suggest reading Bedbury's book, A New Brand World. Bedbury was the brand manager for both Nike and Starbucks. And the fact that he scored huge twice in a row tells you that he understands the art very well. Nike's internal brand statement was authentic athletic performance. When you look at a Nike ad, that's exactly what you feel. You feel that if you strap these shoes onto your feet, you will be an authentic athlete, that you will have great performance potential. And it's reflected in everything Nike does. In fact, I stole this from Nike. When they sit down and they say, we're going to write a campaign, or we're going to refine our market message, or we're coming out with a new product, they put that up on a wall so that everyone is staring at it and thinking about it as they're doing their work. So you have a group of people who don't look at their market accurately. They don't know how to articulate a value proposition, much less fold it into a brand statement. And then they have this problem that they are unwilling to settle for a smaller part of the market in order to assure their success. They can't see the forest for the trees. They can't even tell that there's different species of trees in the forest, much less that it takes different axes and saws to cut down different types of trees. This gets us into the painful subject of segmentation. Most founders are bad at segmentation. Even the ones who understand it on a conceptual level do not do great segmentation. And the reason is that they are reluctant to sell to something less than their whole market. Segmentation, when you get into the big leagues, is insane. You will end up with multidimensional segmentation models that try to map not only every segment of the market and every subsegment of the market, but each one of the personas that you have to sell to with inside of each one of those subsegments. As a founder, you don't have to worry about it. This is probably as complex as your segmentation chart will ever get. But note that no matter what your product is, you're going to go out to the market and you're going to see that there are different groups that you can sell to. Understand, you cannot, in the beginning, sell to all of them at once. You don't have the resources, you don't have the time, you don't have all the features to make a whole product for every segment, so you need to pick and choose. And when you read Crossing the Chasm, you know that you need to pick that beachhead segment. You need to find that one that's going to be your winner, the one that you can make defensible over time, and then focus relentlessly on that. The other thing that a lot of founders don't realize is that for anything more complex than sand, you usually have one or two or more buyers in the buying process. here's a fun game to play. This Saturday morning, wake up early for a change, turn on the TV, watch Saturday morning cartoons, and specifically watch the breakfast cereal cartoons or advertisements. What you see is fun, happiness, animated figures, primary colors. Who's the target market? Kids. Now go to the grocery store on Monday, find that exact box of cereal up on the shelf, and tell me what the banner across the top or the little badge on the corner says. It says, made with whole grains. Who's the target market that's selling to? Parents. So even something as simple as breakfast cereals has at least 2 personas that you have to sell to. Now imagine coming up with the next great CRM system and all the different personas you have to sell to in marketing, in sales, in admin, in tech support, and blah, 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 blah. One of the truisms is that if you do not sell to everybody on the decision matrix, somebody can veto you. When I took over marketing North America for SUSE Linux, Red Hat owned the mind of the techies. If you asked a techie about Linux, they said, oh, Red Hat, yeah, I've got that running on these servers back here. We ran into a problem. If SUSE was going to try to communicate to the techies, we would lose because that battle had already been lost. So we backpedaled. One of the other personas that you have to sell to for Linux and infrastructure is the CXO, your Chief Technology Officer, your Chief Information Officer. So we devised most of our campaign to talk to those people. That's one way to win a market if you have some stiff competition. Find out who has veto power and find out who can veto the vetoer. The techies could veto SUSE coming in, but they can't veto their CIO. And that's one of the ways that we won. So you have to segment, you have to sub-segment, you have to map your personas, you have to map the motivations of your personas, both the logical and the emotional, and then address all of that in your outgoing market communications. Now, yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but where is the difference between genotypes and segments? I mean, how can I differentiate that is a segment and a
Great. The question was, what's the difference between a segment and a genotype or a persona? We use genotype in my company, and other people use the word persona. A segment is a portion of the market defined by commonality of need. So in other words, in segment 1, let's say these people have a list of 10 features that they absolutely have to have. That's one segment. If the people in segment 2 only need 8 of those features, but they have 3 other features that they need, they have a different set of needs, so that's a different segment. Genotypes are people. Commonly, we use job titles, at least in B2B, to identify who a persona is. But a persona is a person who has a certain specific set of job-related or personal goals that they need to achieve. So in other words, imagine our typical IT shop. The CIO has one set of needs. He has some very strategic thoughts about what he needs to accomplish over the next 5 years in terms of infrastructure, applications, blah, blah, blah. But he also has other goals, like he wants to reduce the total number of technologies in his shop. He wants to reduce his payroll, or at least keep it from growing. He wants to reduce his tech support calls, things like that. The server admin guys, and I spent 10 years being a techie over at NASA and other places, they have much different needs and desires. They want the hardware to quit blowing up. They want the operating system to be stable for at least more than an hour. Those are Microsoft shops, by the way. I shouldn't tell this war story, but I love it too much. I managed to get a room of 6,000 people to groan in unison. I was on stage with the CEO of Novell Corporation during BrainShare, and I had him and Linus Torvald, the inventor of Linux, off to my left. And part of what I had to do was demonstrate that you could actually, over a network, boot a computer and install an operating system on it. So we've got these big monitors. They flip over to monitor number 2, it's black, because that's the computer that we're going to turn on remotely. And I said, on this monitor here, you see a dead computer, better known as a Microsoft Windows server in its normal operating state. 6,000 people who hate Microsoft groaned in unison. It's a beautiful sound, it really is. So, back to your question. The genotypes or the personas are the people. You have to understand what makes their hearts and their minds go. One of the last real jobs that I had, I got to redefine an organization from the ground up. We sold software which was tied into utilities, and it would alert people when the network was down or when there were trouble tickets that needed to be answered, et cetera, et cetera. Horrible market, but at the time we had numerous competitors. When I looked at the key buyers in the 2 segments that we were going after, we noticed one similarity, and that was that they had extremely stressful jobs. So the tagline for the product, and it appeared in all of our advertising, was peace of mind. What does that have to do with software? Nothing. But it had everything to do with those people's jobs. They would see our advertisements, they would see us at a trade show booth, and they could tell from the diagram and the little feature list off to the left what we did, but that's not what we were selling them. We were selling them that this will make your job less stressful. You have to do both halves of the human brain, and that's why you need to know your genotypes. So when you get into segmentation, one of the things that you should do, not always necessary, but I advise it, is to come up with a segment scorecard. And what you do is at a very high level, rough guessing is allowed, you try to calculate how tough it is to sell to people in that segment. How much of the market is left? Is it already saturated, or is there a lot of bad room? How many tough competitors do I have? Then, from that, what is our revenue? What is our cost to sell? What is our cost to support? And what you're going to find out is that there's going to be 1 or 2 segments that are clearly better than all of your other choices. If you're still in the design phase of your product, you need to step back, look at those target segments, and figure out what your product doesn't have that it absolutely has to have for those segments. The reason this is important is that by picking the right segment, you're going to have much faster revenues, you're going to have much lower cost of selling, you're probably going to have less tech support and administrative support as well, because your customers are going to be very interactive in terms of it being successful. If you don't do this, then you're just guessing. If you walk into a segment where your competitors are ready to kick your butt, if you walk into a segment where the customers go, then you're going to burn out all of your cash and get nowhere. So with that, let's open it up for questions, keeping in mind that there are 7 pillars to marketing strategy, and if necessary, I've got all of my other slides on the deck and we can roll to them. Questions? I almost saw a hand go up back there.
What are the 7 pillars?
First, define your market. This includes not only what is the big market, but what is your addressable market, what is your realistic market. In other words, keep whittling it down. The next one, segment. You got to go through segmentation in order to figure out where you can realistically play. After that, genotype analysis. Who in your target segment do you have to sell to, and what do you need to sell them? After that, whole product definition. Are you sure that your product meets all, or at least most of the needs of the people in your target segments? Positioning. In the grand world of this segment, considering all of your competitors, all of your customer needs, and your key differentiations, where do you position yourself in the map? Because that's going to guide your communications a lot. Branding. What do you want people to think and feel about your product? And finally, messaging. What is the actual stuff you will be saying to people, and why should they believe you? You'll notice that these are layers. I call them pillars, layers. I use the term too interchangeably. You cannot go to the next step until you complete the step below it. Well, you can, but you'll screw up. Imagine trying to brand your product if you don't know what your segment and your genotypes are. Sure, you could do it, but you'll be saying the wrong things to the wrong people at the wrong time. Yes?
Can you use an example of a social proof that we also noticed by using this model?
A product that you're familiar with?
How Uber or some or like Amazon, like how they do this proof, like how they can like do the procedure. Because I'm right now already clear about how to actually.
Let me use SUSE Linux because I've given this talk so many times that it's like, tattooed on the inside of my frontal lobe. Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. The question was, give us an example of a product that we know and how you would go through all these different steps. All right, so SUSE Linux, the market was pretty obvious. It was anyone who had money who might need to want to use Linux. That basically meant companies. However, we narrowed it down through segmentation. There are a lot of uninteresting Linux buyers, people with little mom and pop shops, people who are doing experimentation, people who are running stupid little print and file servers and not doing anything else. So we decided our segment was going to be enterprises, and then specifically people who had global aspirations for Linux. They saw it as their future. Genotype analysis. We had to eventually sell to the techies because they were going to at least test drive the product. We had to sell to the chief technology officer whose job it was to figure out how all the technologies work together. But primarily we had to sell to the CIOs who were trying to come up with a 5-year strategy. And what I did, and you can still find this out on the web, is an article titled What CXOs Think About Linux. This tells you how old this piece is. But all I did was I went out and I talked to every CIO I could find. I said, tell me your 5-year plan. We're not even going to talk about Linux today. They told me their 5-year plan. I told them their stories back to them, but using Linux as the example of how they could achieve that. That's how we got Ford Motor Company to say that SUSE Linux was going to be the default Linux globally. Whole product definition. So, a whole product is one that addresses all the needs and possibly all the wants and desires of the key buyer. And so you have to make sure, you have to define what that is. You have to go do your research and find out what people want. Then you have to design your product so that you at least come close to meeting all those things. And don't be afraid to go out to market with a 75% product. A lot of times people will settle for good enough. After that, we had to position SUSE Linux. One of the interesting things at that particular point in time was SUSE was the only Linux that ran on IBM mainframes. And a lot of people thought that that was a really strange thing to do. But I interviewed CIOs who were doing that to explain their case, and what we were doing was we were positioning Linux as such a serious, business-oriented, no-holds-barred, absolutely reliable Linux that you could put on your mainframe and serve your entire company on the hardware you already know. So if you're an IBM owner and you hear, I can put Linux up in a partition, you don't even think about Red Hat at that point. So that was the positioning, putting in the mind of the buyer what the differentiation was in relationship to the competition. Branding, that was the biggest problem that I had with the guys at SUSE because it didn't matter how much I explained the concept to them, they could not get their brains around it. So what I did was internally I composed my own branding statement, and the branding statement was the only serious enterprise-grade Linux available. That's why I wanted people to think and feel. There's a feel aspect to that. That sounds like a think statement, but the feel aspect inside of IT, and I know this because I used to work there, is that failure is painful. And so if you position yourself and you brand yourself as saying this is the only serious thing that can be used in a modern enterprise, then you get this sense of assurance and this sense of peace of mind that you're not going to fail. And then finally, messaging, and this was a funny one. Our messaging changed year to year. And the reason was that when we would tell a CIO this in the year 2001, we knew that they would be talking to their techies in that language during 2001. So 2002, we would start telling CIOs a different story, But we would start telling a 2001 story to the techies. And what the techies were hearing was, oh, this is what my CIO wants. I need to pay attention. So the messaging needs to reflect the brand, but it also needs to reflect the individual needs of each of the buyers. So when you come up with your message manual, a little book, maybe 5 or 6 pages of all the different core messages, you have different messages for each one of the different genotypes. And when you get up to the point where you have 5 products spanning 27 different segments with a accumulation of 84 different genotypes that you all need to come up with messaging for, that's the time to retire because it just gets way too painful after that. Yes?
So how would I take all of these strategies and apply it into like social media marketing or more like PR marketing or things that are online? Like, you know, because kids are always on their phone, and if that's my target, like how would I get this across with less than like 5 seconds?
The question is that when you go through all of this work, how do you then convert that into your outbound communications, your marketing strategy, your go-to-market plan? And I hate to say it, but the answer to that is it's very dependent on what your product is, who your target market is, and who the key buyers are. The plan and the channels and the communication strategy that you would use for a CIO is different than a kid who's downloading an app. Absolutely different. So there's, my preference when you get to this point is then you go look at the communication preferences of the audience, because everyone's different. They like to receive information differently. For example, I love to read short things online. I hate it when somebody says, please watch my video. So you have to understand how people prefer to receive the information, compose the information in their preferences, and then the one thing which I keep preaching over and over, keep it below 45 seconds. Preferably keep it under 10 seconds if you can. But the attention span of the average human is shrinking dramatically all the time, and if you can't communicate what you need to in under 15 seconds, you begin to lose their attention. When I write elevator pitches for people, I make sure that they can be communicated in under 10 seconds. And if I can't do that, then we've got a problem. More questions? Yes?
Do you think it's possible that the order of these peers might like change it? Because nowadays we found that a lot of us try to customize our products after we communicate the messaging, and then we saw that people need these kind of things, and then we come back to like customize the product itself. So do you think is there like possibility that influence those orders of how we do marketing?
So the basic question is, does this order change? Do you always have to go from the bottom up? The answer is no, you always go from the bottom up, but there is an accordion effect. Because a lot of times you will go to market and you think that you have really thought out your position and your brand and your messaging, and you go out to the market and you're getting pushback that you didn't expect. So you then start to go back down the stack and you say, why is this one thing not working? And occasionally you may have to go down 1 or 2 or 3 steps. You'll never go down below whole product analysis, because then you're getting into your fundamental decisions about what market you're going after. But you will go back down the stack, you will reevaluate, you will change some things, and then echo those changes back up through any layer that's on top.
In these early stages, like most of us are, and we're trying to build an actual product, perhaps we don't have the features that we try to build, but we're doing a lot of the research. How do we get through all these levels to convey the branding, the messaging, and a product definition when we don't actually have what we want to build entirely? And it's, it's, you're caught there.
Right. So the question is, if you're in the early stage of development and you really haven't planned out your market, how do you kind of bring the two together? And the question really is getting to the 60% research point. I'll explain that in a second. But you started to design this product because you intuitively saw a need in the market. And you saw a way that you could be different. You need to sanity check that, but you probably were accurate. There's something out there. You then need to research to the point where you are reasonably sure about your decisions, and then go. Colin Powell, our former head of the Joint Chief of Staff, once said something which I found interesting. He said, I study a problem till I know 60% of what I need to know, and then I go with my gut. I'm not sure that really applies in marketing and business, but it's something to ponder. If you do enough research to the point where you think the diminishing rate of return on your research isn't going to tell you that much more about your customers and your products and your market, then it's time to launch. So, if you're still designing your product, you should have at least researched past genotypes. You should have an idea of who your customers are, what their wants and needs are. At that point, you get to evaluate your whole product and see whether you're on the right development path or not. If you do that research and you go, uh-oh, we're going there and our customers are going there, then you've got to revise and pivot. Anyone else? Right up front.
I was just thinking, like, in this metrics, you've been talking about like product, people, and also positioning. And there's another very important factor in marketing, which is price. So my question is, how do I find out the right price to charge to my target client?
So the question is, realistically, what is price? And I am so glad you said that, because when I was in management school, product, place, and price, the 3 Ps, yeah. And suddenly this one brain cell way in the back, you revived it. It's been a long time since I've heard that phrase. There's different methods, and the method really depends on the product. I have a triangulation system where I try to measure what the market will bear, how high can I get the price before people start walking away from the table, what my competitors charge to make sure that I'm not completely out of whack, because if they're charging $5 and you're charging $1,000, then there's a basic disconnect in the market. What the market will bear, what my competition is doing, and what premium I deserve for the differentiation I deliver. That company that I told you that I used to work for, the one where we did the genotype analysis, the first year, they were making like 5% annual growth rate, top line revenues, before I showed up. The first year, we achieved 26%. Once I realized that I had the right formula for the market, one of the things I did was a satisfaction survey. And in there, I asked, really, realistically, you, the customer, what do you think this product is worth? What should we charge? It's funny that no one ever asked that question. Bill, how much should I be gigging you for? People will give you a straight up answer. And there's some games I had to play with the survey form just to make sure that I didn't cheat myself. But I found out that we were undercharging by 17%. So one great way is simply to ask the question. Google now has a consumer surveying tool, which is fascinating to watch. For a fairly small amount of money, you can survey a lot of people in a short amount of time. We do surveying all the time. If you've got the time, go get your own personal copy of Lime Survey, throw it up on a server, or use SurveyMonkey, anything that allows you to use graphic images or videos if you need to demonstrate something or show differences between product. Then ask them the price, but do this. Set 3 different price ranges, from what you think the rock bottom is to the midpoint, another one that's from the highest price you think you can charge down to the midpoint, and then something that takes the slice out of the middle. And then ask that question, one of those 3 questions, randomly to different people in your survey group. And what you'll find is that prices tend to center around expectations. And that's a great way to make sure that you're not charging either way too much or way too little. Any more questions? Yes?
I just want a clarification on that little survey that you just talked about. Are you randomly showing them one price, or are you showing them all three of the prices and asking, what would you pay for this?
In most of the ways I do this is that for each one of those 3 clusters, I'll give them 5 prices. And I'll say, which of these 5 prices do you think is the most appropriate for the value that you're being given?
Okay, like a specific price, like 22.99 and 21.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so what you'll see, and this is an interesting thing about human nature, is that people will usually tell you one notch above the middle. But what you'll discover is that if the upper tier, you don't get that one notch above the middle, then you see definite price pressure down towards the midpoint. If you see a lot of people in the bottom cluster giving you the top price and you're reaching the midpoint or higher in the top cluster, then you have lift.
So one of the problems that I have with surveys is that people lie. So how can we tell when they're lying? Because if you put like different prices, people would often say like, oh yeah, like this is a fair price, but at the end, in the moment that you're selling, they're like not willing to pay. So how can we deal with that? How can we know?
Right. So the fundamental question is that people occasionally give you misinformation in surveys, and how do you work around that to make sure you're getting accurate pricing information? The multi-tiering is one way to do it because you're forcing decisions. Another popular method, I don't use it a lot because I'm typically playing the B2B space where misinformation is a little less prevalent, but it's a forced ladder decision. You force them to make trade-offs and you get them to price the trade-offs, and then by doing that you tend to assemble the price from the base up. So in other words, if you had to choose between this feature and this feature and you only had $100 to spend, how would you spend it? And they'll end up breaking up. So there are a lot of different tricks in surveying that you can do to try to eliminate the bad information. But again, when you triangulate and you look at what your competitors are doing and you're looking at what the high end is, even bad information will tend to filter out because you're getting a realistic perspective from multiple different points. Next question. Yes?
At what point in the, I guess,
It doesn't at what point in the stack would you start bringing in a more visual messaging, or someone who would take over that piece of a puzzle? Because eventually you're going to have some sort of visual or audio or something.
I would say it's about the time that you get your branding right. Anything before then, you're talking about the actual product itself and what's in the head of people, and it's not at the point where you need to communicate. Branding is the first point of communication, and that's when your logo design comes in, that's when your color scheme comes in, et cetera, et cetera. Any other questions? Going once? Going twice? All right, well, thank you, everyone. This has been a joy. I hope to be back. Don't forget to tell the people that you want that all-day seminar.